Howdy y'all, I'm Paint That Bell, and today what I'll be doing is a tutorial for y'all. Not so long ago, I left a bunch of polls up for y'all to vote on. It was the deciding factor in which topic I'll be discussing our very first tutorial about. So I'd like to invite you to join us as I try my best to explain the tricky subject that is fabric. Alright, let's go ahead and jump right into it, shall we? First off, when drawing fabric, it's important to know the forces that cause folds and wrinkles. The first force I want to tell you about is gravity. I think everybody knows what gravity is and what it does. It pulls down objects, essentially. Same goes for fabric. So the folds on fabric, like drapes and skirts, are mostly caused by gravity. When drawing these things, keep in mind gravity's effects on the fabric. When there's no wind or movement, the folds are going to hang down and be vertical. If your folds are affected by only gravity, then it's going to be vertical. The folds are rather large and will fold in on themselves, especially when it comes down to ruffles and pleats like you see on anime girls. That, I believe, is the best way I can do to explain the gravity folds. There's not much to explain about these folds as it's pretty straightforward, or at least to me anyway. Hopefully I'm not missing anything important and that it actually makes sense to you. Now, another force is stretch and pull. So if you take a piece of cloth and pull on it, then you'll notice that the folds are pulled to where you grab. And gravity affects the rest of the folds. So you'll see more folds and wrinkles up to the point where it is being pulled, and the rest of the folds will be draped, following the curve up to the point. Also, if you take a good look at your pants, you'll notice that what it does is the folds curve along your leg. It stretches to make those folds. So when a fabric pulls, make sure you draw your folds where it's being held, and where it's stretched, follow the curves and let your folds and wrinkles go along your object. Another factor that plays into how fabric folds and wrinkles is what it's made out of. So you can have loose and thin, loose and thick, thin and tight, and thick and thin. Basically, that's what the four basics are. Now, of course, your fabric can be anywhere in between those four basic type of materials, but I'm showing you the basics of what these materials are made out of. Have a piece of cloth that's in between the two of the basics, then make small adjustments between the two of them. You don't have to make much adjustments, thankfully. That's why these are the basics. Now I have my bases ready to show what I mean. The fabric is going to be clothing, but the same principles apply to regular cloth. Now, first, I'm going to do thin and loose fabric material. Thin and loose clothing is mostly affected by gravitational folds. It's going to be airy, so it won't cling to your person, or base in my case. Wait, that rhymed. I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. So anyway, back to the base. Around the chest and stomach areas is mostly where gravity folds and wrinkles will more than likely be. Very few stretch folds and wrinkles will happen if your body is straight and you're wearing clothing that is thin and loose. But if your arm is bent, for example, then folds and wrinkles will appear more along the elbow where it's bent. And that's just an example. Next is thick and loose. When I think of thick and loose fabric material, I see a chunky sweater. With this kind of material, you're going to replace the thin wrinkles with thick and stout folds in fewer amounts. It'll fold in on itself in some places. These will be really big folds, so you'll see less of folds as they're bigger. It's why when you wear a really big and thick sweater, you'll see that you appear a lot thicker yourself. It's why I don't wear those sweaters. Next up is thin and tight. I mostly see tank tops when I think of tight and thin fabric material, so I'll use that as an example. When drawing tight and thin clothing, remember that the fabric clings to the body. So you'll see smaller wrinkles that are heavily affected by stretch, especially around the chest area. Last but not least is the tight and thick fabric material. Leather jackets are really good examples of this. So basically you'll have thick folds, but in more quantity than if your material was loose and thick like I showed you earlier. Tight and thick will also be form-fitting as well, but not as much as tight and thick fabric materials. Now what I'm going to do is grab another base, which may or may not be an original character of mine. And I'll demonstrate what I've been talking about, plus another factor that plays into fabric folds and wrinkles. Well, aren't you special? I'll be showing you movement and how fabric reacts to movement. Alright, so here's the base. So for more movement, firstly you need to think of the material that your fabric is made out of. It'll determine just how many folds there are, how gravity plays with it, and how much it'll move. What I'll use as the biggest example of movement that I could think of is capes. Now capes can be thin and loose or thick and loose. Capes will be pulled by 2 points, typically where the cape is attached to. So it'll drape closer to these points and have a lot of folds and wrinkles around there. Now movement is where it becomes tricky. What's causing the movement? Is it your character moving, or is it the wind? Or is it a combination of both? Which direction is your character moving or the wind blowing? How much is the wind blowing? Well, I used both wind and the character movement. The wind is blowing to the right and very strongly. My material for the cape is thick and loose. That's what you need to think about when you look at fabric that is blowing in the wind or moving. It may feel like a lot, but it really is second nature. You just have to think of it in your head and think which direction the material is moving towards. Now on to how to draw the cape and how it moves. First off with capes is how it'll start out, is it's usually gravity affects it first and will tug down a little until the fabric is no longer directly above the body. Then the wind will start pulling it upwards, blowing it upwards, only for it to be tugged down by the ends, creating a very elongated S, or a less curved of an S, depending on how much movement there is in the cape and how thick the cape is. Now the rest of the cake will be... I said cake. The rest of the cape will be very big folds that allow the same curve as the original curve shape. Now when it comes to other pieces of clothing, it basically follows the same principles except it'll have different shapes. But nevertheless, it'll follow the initial curve and the rest of the folds will be less exaggerated versions of the initial curve. Now, I think that's all I can think of to talk about fabric. So I'll finish drawing the rest of this drawing and I'll see you soon. Alright y'all, that's all I have for today for this video. Let me know if this was helpful and whatever tutorials you'd like to see down in the comment section below, and I'll add your pics into a poll for DeviantArt. Please leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you'll see more of me and my content. I'll see you all in the next video. Stay artsy. Later, Gators.